All right, here we go. What is the ego? Hello, friends. Kylie from Embody Nadora, which is a place to offer you a space to come home to who you are and really embody your truest self. This video is a continuation of the Shadow and Ego Self series, of which, if you haven't watched the first introductory video, you can find it on our channel if you wish, as well as many others that you can use along your journey. In this video, we will be focusing on the ego aspect of self. We will go deeper into what it is, how to recognize it, where you might find it, how to deal with it, and of course, how to work with it rather than against it to heal and move towards wholeness, because that's what we all ultimately want, right? And that's what we want for you. From this wholeness arises this broader and deeper way of seeing the world, ourselves, and our experiences that then continues to engage and enliven our very soul, like being a child all over again when everything is new and exciting and beautiful. So, if you're ready, okay, when we think of healing, we don't usually consider the ego, or we consider the ego as something that needs to be overcome, battled, or ignored. Now, when this healing attention is directed towards a relationship that we acknowledge, maybe like with a partner or a family member, or even our own physical body, we can actually be quite generous and pour that healing energy quite liberally out onto what needs to be healed. But what about when it comes to healing a relationship that we don't even acknowledge, such as our relationship with our own ego? The ego is an aspect of self that gets a pretty bad rap. And so many of us deny that we even have an ego. So, how do we heal or include something that we believe doesn't even exist? And this is the first step in our ego journey, accepting the presence of our ego and then considering it as something other than an enemy that lives within us. And then through that, we can work on understanding it, because although being more aligned with the true completeness of self is a beautiful and healthy goal along any personal growth path, there shouldn't really be a desire to eliminate the ego in modern spirituality. Instead, as we move towards this embodiment of our true self, what we hope you will find yourself doing is allowing the identity of the ego to just naturally merge with the other aspects of self, so that you feel more at ease, more balanced, and more whole just naturally. Trying to force the ego into submission will never work anyway. It will only ever create a bigger battle, as the ego aspect of self resists and struggles to defend its place. So this kind of inner conflict sort of churns within, and choice or response then becomes impossible, meaning that you rely primarily on reaction and instinct in most situations. So, how do we work with it instead of in opposition to it? How do we build a relationship that becomes so close and so safe that one just gives over to the other? How do we make friends with the ego? So, remember that the ego represents how we want to be seen, how we project ourselves, and is the character we are playing or pretending to be. This is often an exaggeration or downplay of who we really are. It can be how we believe we should be, or how we want and need, or how we think others want and need us to be. It can also be an impersonation of someone who has the qualities that we want to have. In any case, the ego self is the aspect of who we are that shows up differently to how we are when no one is watching. It is how we are projecting ourselves in public. So, as long as you believe the ego to be bad or malignant, you are bound to its conditions. So, in this video, I want to show you how to look at the ego, to really see it and begin to understand it and love it completely for what it is and for the purpose that it has served you. And it has served you. Then, through this non-aggressive sort of practice of new programming, that inner conflict won't take place, and transcendence can be achieved. So, in order to heal your relationship with the ego, a deeper understanding of who it is and why it is needed. Now, unlike your higher self, which is an endless ocean of compassion, connection, and calm, your ego is the warrior within you. He has tried to keep you safe by being super defensive and protective. So think about it like the well-meaning king who wants to protect his daughter's virtue and so locks her away in a tower where she cannot be tempted or harmed. The ego locks away your wounds in an effort to keep them from being touched or triggered, which the ego knows can be painful and uncomfortable. And so, in essence, the ego is like that bodyguard that sometimes keeps you clear out of trouble, but sometimes misreads the situation and ends up doing more damage than good. So, one powerful approach for working with the ego that I love is called the internal family systems. Now, this is a method developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz that is ingrained in neuroscience while also being intensely focused on self-compassion and personal transformation and growth. In this system, the goal is to become self-led by a higher aspect of self that is in touch with the other higher aspects or the other internal aspects of self. And this higher aspect is wise and loving and patient and harmoniously balanced. Essentially, it is the witness of all other aspects of self, and it is the seat of our consciousness. And so, through this method, we allow this higher self, our consciousness, to recognize each other aspect as individual and then to compassionately guide each to manifest itself as its highest possible heart-centered expression. When you can consider these different aspects of self as a subdivision of the ego, like different members of one family, you can start to see the purpose of each behavior and role. So there are no bad parts and bonds become easier to make because we see them more with love and gratitude for what they are trying to do for us. Now, IFS is essentially a therapy, but you can use it yourself as a very powerful self-awareness tool within which you can practice being the calm, confident, and compassionate observer. And the ultimate goal is then to heal the wounds and reestablish a safe, healthy, and balanced inner system that is empowered and led by the self. And once we start healing our relationship to the ego through how we think about it, feel towards it, and the way we talk about it, it can soften and relax. And through that process, we are able to reach the deeper parts of ourselves that the ego has been protecting for so long. When you see it in true light, the ego is simply like a gatekeeper. Now, it's not unusual to want to avoid doing this kind of deeper healing work because many of us have tried to look at and move through these things in the past, maybe unsuccessfully, and end up making things worse. And so we just stop trying. But this is often just a result of doing this kind of self-work, as there's this like backlash of resistance from this gatekeeper. So instead of pushing or forcing our way through, we just need like the code or the key that gives us access and permission to enter through the gateway. And then when we befriend the ego and earn its trust through our genuine compassion and understanding, it will just graciously step aside, allowing us to heal all those deep wounds. Now, deep healing begins with acknowledging the presence of this gatekeeper who is tirelessly trying to protect our most vulnerable and wounded parts, and then create a loving relationship with this part of yourself through which you feel safe. And the effects that come from embracing the ego like this and recognizing its role will allow you just to transform any aspect of your life into something that feels less conflicting and more balanced and easy. And this is something that you can start today. You can start right now because it begins with a more inclusive version of self-compassion, one that includes the ego and reflects gentle understanding inwards to the parts of self that we may have been trying to get rid of or pretend don't exist, and instead seek to include the oceans of unexplored emotions and wounds that are just waiting for our compassion. Because if you are doing anything else, you are instigating conflict. And if you are directing any level of hatred or disgust or fear or ignorance towards your ego, you are acting in opposition to your own internal peace and therefore your soul's true expression. And unfortunately, this approach is quite common within modern spirituality practices, but is actually unhealthy. It is toxic and is damaging to our very being on every level: mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. The ego makes us human, and we are human. We are the embodiment of the soul or spiritual self here in human form. This is not a part of ourselves that needs to be rejected in order to pursue a spiritual life. We are here to learn how to navigate, balance, and harmonize with all things, to be a part of life, not to dominate over any part of it. And the reward that you get from a healthy relationship with your ego is light. By forging this relationship, you bring all of your feelings out of the darkness so that you can heal. So even when it's tough, even when it's uncomfortable, we see the value in this process of self-awareness and nurturing your relationships with ego, because it leads to a more compassionate and complete relationship with yourself that is powerful and undeniable. Best practice when beginning is to probably keep a journal and be open to discovering more than one of these gatekeeper aspects. Which ones do you know well? Which ones are louder? Then witness how deepening your relationship with the ego self begins to bring you more peace. You are the only limit to how far this type of healing can go. And remember that we work with these types of practices all the time within our own cycles and on greater scales. So come find us online if you feel ready for this type of support. What it comes down to is showing yourself, all aspects of yourself, some kindness. And if your kindness and compassion does not include yourself, all aspects of yourself, including the ego, then as a practice and as an experience, that work, that kindness to self is incomplete. But the power and the choice to change any and all of these things is always yours. So I hope you feel empowered by that a little bit along your journey, and coming back home to who you are.